The rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets, blurring the world outside Owen's beat-up truck into a watercolor of bleeding streetlights. It was nearly 3 a.m., the dead hour when the city finally exhaled, leaving only the ghosts and the night shift workers to haunt its empty streets. In the passenger seat, his 7-year-old daughter, Mia, was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, her head cushioned by her worn unicorn backpack. Owen was bone-tired, the familiar ache of mopping endless hallways settled deep in his shoulders. All he wanted was their tiny apartment, the click of the lock behind him, the quiet safety of home. Then he saw it. A sleek, silver sedan, impossibly expensive and utterly out of place, was stalled on the shoulder of the deserted industrial road. Its hazard lights pulsed a frantic, lonely rhythm in the downpour. Inside, a silhouette moved, frantic and agitated. His foot eased off the gas. Every instinct screamed at him to keep going. He was tired, he had his daughter, and whoever was in that car surely had a premium roadside assistance plan. But his father's voice echoed in his memory, a low, steady rumble from years past. "You don't pass by trouble, son. You stop. You always stop." With a sigh that fogged the windshield, Owen flicked on his turn signal and pulled over behind the silver car. He grabbed his faded denim jacket from the back seat, the fabric cool and damp, and quietly opened his door, trying not to wake Mia. The wind whipped rain into his face as he approached the driver's side window. He tapped gently on the glass. The window slid down with a silent, electric hum, revealing a woman with a perfectly sculpted face, her expression a mask of fury and frustration. She was shouting into a phone, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't care what your estimated time is. It's been an hour. Do you know who I am?" She finally registered his presence, her eyes flicking over his worn jacket, his tired face, his calloused hands. She lowered the phone, her look of irritation shifting to one of sheer, undisguised disdain. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying he was more of a threat than a help. And in that moment, as the intermittent flash of the hazards illuminated her face, the world tilted on its axis. The perfectly styled blonde hair, the cold blue eyes, the small, disdainful curl of her upper lip. It was her. It was Veronica. The woman who had promised him forever and then vanished, leaving behind nothing but a note on the kitchen table and a hole in his life so vast it had nearly swallowed him whole. Veronica, he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. Her meticulously constructed composure shattered. The disdain in her eyes morphed into disbelief, then a flicker of something ugly, panic. "Owen," she whispered, her voice stripped of its earlier authority. She looked from his face to his rusty truck, where Mia's sleeping form was just visible in the gloom. The sight seemed to offend her. "What are you doing here?" It was a stupid question, born of shock. He was here because she had a flat tire, a fact made obvious by the shredded rubber on her rear passenger side wheel. He ignored the question, the old, familiar ache of her abandonment flaring in his chest. But he pushed it down. Right now, she was just a person stranded in the rain. "You have a flat," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion churning within him. "I have a jack and a spare in my truck. I can change it for you." Veronica stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the men from her past with the rain-soaked stranger offering help. She looked at her silk blouse, at the storm raging outside, and then back at him. "Fine," she snapped, as if granting him a great favor. She rolled up her window without another word, retreating into the dry, leather-scented bubble of her luxury car, leaving him standing in the deluge. He walked back to his truck, his movements stiff. He retrieved the heavy jack and the lug wrench, the cold steel a familiar weight in his hands. Every turn of the wrench, every grunt of effort as he lifted the heavy car, was a punctuation mark in a silent, furious conversation with the past. He worked with a grim efficiency, the rain soaking him to the bone, his knuckles scraping against the wheel hub. He could feel her watching him from the car. He wasn't the ambitious young man she had married anymore. He was a janitor. A man who worked with his hands, who smelled of pine-scented cleaner at the end of his shift. He was everything she had run away from. When he was done, he lowered the car, tightened the bolts one last time, and tossed the ruined tire into her trunk. He knocked on the window again. She lowered it, her expression unreadable. "It's done," he said, his voice raspy. "The donut will get you to a garage. Don't go over 50 on it." For a moment, she just looked at him, at the water dripping from his hair and tracing lines through the grime on his face. He expected a thank you, perhaps a flicker of the girl he once knew. Instead, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a wallet. She extracted 2 crisp $100 bills and held them out. "For your trouble," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike, as if he were a service she had hired. Owen looked at the money, then back at her face. The gesture was more insulting than if she had spit on him. He slowly shook his head. "I don't want your money, Veronica." He turned and walked away before she could argue, the rain washing over him, though it could never wash away the sting of this encounter. Back in his small apartment, the scent of lavender from Mia's bath still lingered in the air. He tucked her into bed, her breathing evening out almost immediately. He stood in the doorway of her room, watching her. Her face, so peaceful in sleep, was a perfect blend of his and Veronica's, a constant, beautiful, painful reminder. He remembered the note. "I can't do this, Owen. I need more. I deserve more. More than a 2-bedroom rental. More than a husband who found satisfaction in fixing things rather than owning them. More than a life measured in scraped-together savings and quiet evenings at home." She had wanted the world he saw only in glossy magazines, and she had gone out and gotten it, leaving him to pick up the pieces of the world she had shattered. His life now was a testament to quiet survival. He worked the night shift as a custodian in the gleaming downtown tower of Sterling Cross Enterprises. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It allowed him to be there to get Mia on the bus in the morning and be waiting for her when she got home. Their life was small, but it was full of love. Her drawings were their wallpaper, her laughter their music. He traced the outline of a crayon sun she had taped to the refrigerator, a silent promise he renewed every day: he would always be enough for her. The next evening, at work, the sterile quiet of the 40th floor was broken by the sharp click of heels on marble. It was Isabel Sterling, the company's CEO. She was a fixture of the late-night hours, a woman who seemed to be forged from steel and ambition. She rarely noticed him, her gaze always fixed on a phone or a tablet. She was beautiful in a severe, intimidating way, her dark hair always pulled back in a sleek, no-nonsense knot. He was just part of the background, the invisible man who made her world clean and orderly. But tonight, as she swept past, a leather-bound portfolio slipped from under her arm, landing with a soft thud on the polished floor. Owen stopped his buffer, the machine's hum dying with a whine. He picked up the portfolio. It felt heavy, important. "Ma'am," he called out softly. "You dropped this." Isabel Sterling turned, her brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. Her eyes, the color of dark coffee, fixed on the portfolio in his hand, and her expression shifted. She strode back, her gaze sharp and assessing, as if checking to see if he'd tried to look inside. "Thank you," she said, her voice cool and clipped as she took it from him. He simply nodded and was about to turn back to his work when she spoke again. "You're here every night," it wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Owen replied. "This floor is my last stop." She paused, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "This portfolio. It contains the final drafts for a merger. If I'd lost it," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He just nodded again. It looked important, he offered nothing more, no expectation of a reward, no hint of wanting recognition. He just turned back to his buffer and resumed his work, the steady hum filling the silence. But this time, Isabel didn't walk away immediately. She stood there for a long moment, watching him. For the first time, she wasn't just seeing a janitor, she was seeing a man. She noticed the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture. She had offered a curt thank you, but he hadn't even seemed to register it, his focus already back on his task. In her world of transactional relationships and hidden agendas, his simple, unassuming decency was an anomaly. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic shifted. She started leaving her office door open when he was on her floor. She'd offer a quiet, "Good evening, Owen," and he would return it with a nod and a soft, "Ma'am." One night, she saw a child's drawing of a unicorn taped to the side of his cleaning cart. It was rendered in bright, chaotic crayon. "Your daughter?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Owen's face broke into a rare, genuine smile. "That's Mia. She's my artist." The smile transformed him, erasing some of the weariness. Isabel felt an unexpected pang in her chest. She lived in a world of calculated smiles and strategic kindness. This was different. It was real. She found herself looking forward to these small, quiet interactions, these brief moments of unvarnished humanity in her sterile, high-stakes world. The fragile piece of Owen's world was shattered a week later. There was a knock on his apartment door, sharp and insistent. He opened it to find Veronica standing there, dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She wasn't disheveled and stranded this time, she was polished, powerful, and predatory. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him into his small living room. Her expensive perfume instantly overpowered the familiar scent of his home. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on the worn couch and the second-hand bookshelf, her lip curling slightly. "This is where you're raising her?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Owen's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Veronica?" She turned to face him, her expression cold and calculated. "I'm getting married," she announced. "To Richard Sterling." Owen blinked. "Sterling? As in Sterling Cross Enterprises? As in Isabel Sterling's brother?" The world suddenly felt very, very small. "He's running for Senate," Veronica continued, her voice like ice. "We are building a life, a very public life. And a loose end from my past, a struggling janitor with a child. It's not a good look." "It's messy." "Mia is not a loose end," Owen said, his voice dangerously low. "She's my daughter." Veronica waved a dismissive hand. "Of course. Which is why I'm here to make you an offer." For her sake, she placed a thick manila envelope on his coffee table. "That's a cashier's check for $250,000. And a legal document. You sign over your parental rights to me, you take the money, and you disappear. You and Mia can start over somewhere else, somewhere far from here. Think of the life you could give her with that money." Owen stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. The money was life-changing. It was a house, a car that didn't break down, a college fund for Mia. It was freedom from the constant, grinding worry that was his shadow. It was everything he couldn't give her. And it would cost him his soul. He looked up from the envelope and met Veronica's cold, expectant gaze. "Get out," he said, the words barely a whisper. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Don't be a fool, Owen. This is the best thing for her. She can have tutors, private schools, travel the world. What can you offer her? A life of watching her father scrub toilets." The cruelty of her words was a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs, but his resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "I can offer her a father," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I can offer her love. I can offer her a home where she knows she is the most important thing in the world. That is not for sale." Veronica's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You've always been a sentimental fool. Fine. Have it your way." Her demeanor shifted, the pretense of a negotiation vanishing, replaced by a raw threat. "Richard's lawyers are the best in the country. We will take you to court. We will paint you as an unfit, impoverished father working a dead-end job, unable to provide a stable environment. We will talk about this pathetic apartment, your meager income. We will bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left. And then, we will take her. You will lose, Owen. And you will lose her." From the hallway, a small voice whimpered. "Daddy." Mia stood there, her unicorn pajamas on, her face pale with fear. She had heard the shouting. She ran to Owen, wrapping her arms tightly around his leg, her small body trembling. She stared at Veronica, her eyes wide with a child's unerring instinct for danger. Owen scooped her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, his body a shield against the woman who was trying to tear their world apart. "You need to leave," he said to Veronica, his voice a low growl of pure, protective fury. Now Veronica gave him one last, venomous look, a look that promised ruin, and then she swept out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Owen sank onto the couch, his heart pounding, Mia sobbing into his shoulder. He held her, whispering reassurances he didn't feel, the weight of Veronica's threat settling over him like a shroud. He knew she was right. In a battle of money and power, he didn't stand a chance. He was just a janitor. The following night at work, Owen moved through his tasks in a fog of despair. The shine on the marble floor seemed to mock him, a reflection of a world he could never be a part of. Veronica's words echoed in his head. What can you offer her? He felt a familiar, crushing sense of inadequacy. He was polishing the brass nameplate outside the executive suite, Sterling Cross Enterprises, when the door opened. It was Isabel. It was after midnight, but she was still there, dressed in a simple black dress, her hair down for once, making her look younger, more vulnerable. She took one look at his face and her own expression softened with concern. Owen. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. He tried to assemble a neutral expression, to give her a noncommittal answer, but the dam of his composure finally broke. He slumped against the wall, the polish rag falling from his hand. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's a personal matter, but she didn't leave. She stepped closer, her usual corporate armor seemingly gone. Talk to me, she said, her voice quiet but firm. What happened? And so, under the cold, fluorescent lights of the deserted hallway, he told her everything. He told her about Veronica, about their past, about Mia. He told her about the encounter on the roadside, and about the horrifying visit, the check, the threats. He laid bare his poverty, his fear, his powerlessness. He expected her to recoil, to see him as the pathetic failure Veronica had described. He expected pity, or worse, dismissal. Instead, Isabel listened with a fierce, still intensity. When he was finished, a long silence hung between them. My brother, Richard, she said finally, her voice tight with a controlled anger that shocked him. He was always drawn to women like that. Polished on the outside, hollow on the inside. She looked at Owen, her dark eyes searching his. My father was a man like your ex-wife's fiancé. He used money and influence as weapons to control his family. I spent years fighting him, fighting for my own identity, for my mother's legacy in this company. I know what it's like to be told your worth is tied to a bank statement. She took a deep breath. He's wrong. She's wrong. A man's worth isn't measured by his job title. It's measured by his integrity. By what he will stand for when everything is on the line. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a CEO, but an ally. You are not going to fight this alone, Owen. Sterling Cross has the best legal team in the state. And as of this moment, they work for you. The next week was a whirlwind. Isabel was true to her word. 2 lawyers from a prestigious downtown firm, men in suits so sharp they could cut glass, met with Owen in a conference room that felt like another planet. They listened to his story with grim, focused expressions, taking copious notes. They were respectful, treating him not as a janitor, but as a client whose cause was righteous. They immediately filed a preemptive motion against any custody challenge, citing harassment and attempted coercion. They also launched a quiet but thorough investigation into Richard Sterling and Veronica. While the legal machine ground into motion, something else was happening. Isabel started making excuses to see him. She brought Mia a set of professional-grade art supplies, claiming she'd ordered them by mistake. She'd stay late at the office, and they would share a pizza from the place downstairs, talking about their lives, their pasts, their dreams. He learned about the immense pressure she was under, the loneliness of her position. She learned about Mia's favorite dinosaur, about the leaky faucet he couldn't afford to fix, about the quiet pride he took in his work. The cavernous gap between their worlds began to shrink, bridged by shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Mia, with her child's pure intuition, adored Isabel. She would run to greet her, showing off her latest drawing. One evening, as Isabel was helping Mia sound out words in a picture book, Owen watched them from the kitchen. The warm lamplight cast a glow on them, the 2 most important people in his life, and his small apartment felt, for the first time, like a complete and perfect home. He saw a future he had never dared to imagine, one filled not just with survival, but with laughter and partnership. He was falling in love with her, not because she was powerful or wealthy, but because she saw the man he was, not the uniform he wore. She saw his heart, and she honored it. The final meeting took place in the same sterile conference room where Owen had first met his lawyers. This time, Veronica and Richard Sterling were on the other side of the polished mahogany table. Richard was exactly as Owen had imagined, handsome, arrogant, with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. Veronica sat beside him, looking pale and strained beneath her perfect makeup. Owen's lead lawyer, a calm, silver-haired man named Mr. Davies, laid out their position with surgical precision. My client, Mr. Miller, has no intention of relinquishing his parental rights. Any attempt to file for custody will be met with a countersuit for emotional distress and malicious intent. Furthermore, he said, sliding a thin file across the table, our investigators have uncovered certain discrepancies. He detailed a history of Richard's shady business deals and Veronica's trail of unpaid debts from before she met him. It wasn't illegal, but it was deeply unflattering, the kind of information that would decimate a political campaign built on an image of integrity and family values. All of this, Mr. Davies concluded softly, will become a matter of public record the moment you file. Richard Sterling's face was a mask of fury. He looked at Veronica as if seeing her, and the mess she'd brought to his door, for the first time. Veronica refused to look at Owen. She stared at the file on the table, her entire future contained within its thin pages. She had wielded power and money as her weapons, only to find herself facing an arsenal far greater than her own. But it wasn't the lawyers or the threat of exposure that truly defeated her. It was the men sitting across from her. Owen hadn't said a word. He just sat there, his back straight, his gaze steady. He wasn't afraid of them. In his quiet dignity, she saw the reflection of everything she had thrown away: loyalty, integrity, and a love so fierce it could move mountains, or in this case, command boardrooms. "This is over," Richard Sterling said through gritted teeth, standing up abruptly. "The offer is withdrawn. We will not be pursuing this matter." He stalked out of the room without a backward glance at Veronica. She lingered for a moment, her composure finally crumbling. She looked at Owen, her eyes filled with a toxic mix of hatred and regret. But she said nothing. She turned and followed her future out the door, defeated not by power, but by the quiet goodness she had once held in her hands and deemed worthless. Owen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for weeks. It was over. He had won. He had protected his daughter. Months later, the city was bathed in the warm, golden light of late autumn. Owen stood in a park, the crisp air filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the sound of children's laughter. He was no longer a night shift janitor. Isabel had recognized his meticulous nature and steady reliability, creating a position for him as a daytime facilities manager for the entire Sterling Cross building. The new job came with better pay, regular hours, and benefits that gave him a sense of security he hadn't felt in years. He watched as Mia, her face bright with joy, chased a soccer ball across the grass. Kicking it back to her was Isabel, her usual sharp business attire replaced by jeans and a soft sweater. She laughed, a free, genuine sound that made Owen's heart swell. After the legal battle, their connection had only deepened. The pretense of boss and employee had fallen away, replaced by the easy intimacy of partnership. They were building a life together, slowly, carefully, a mosaic of his quiet strength and her brilliant fire. His small apartment was no longer just his, it was theirs. Her books were on his shelves, her favorite coffee was in his cupboard, and her laughter filled the spaces that had once been silent. The empty chair at his kitchen table, a long-standing symbol of his loneliness, was now permanently, wonderfully filled. She knelt down to tie Mia's shoe, her dark hair falling across her face. Mia threw her arms around Isabel's neck in a spontaneous, loving hug. Isabel hugged her back, her eyes finding Owen's over Mia's shoulder. In her gaze, he saw everything he had ever hoped for: love, respect, family. He walked over to them, his hand finding hers. Her fingers laced with his, a perfect fit. He had once believed his life was small, defined by the things he lacked. But standing here, with the two people who were his entire world, he knew he was the richest man alive. Veronica had asked what he could possibly offer his daughter. The answer was simple. He could offer her this, a life built not on what they had, but on who they were. A life built on the unshakable foundation of love.